Hey, good afternoon. I'm Heather Sullivan, your host of Sullivan Smart Sense. We are awaiting my guest. I'm told that hopefully they'll be able to join us any moment now. But in the meantime, I just wanted to welcome you. Thanks so much for tuning in with us. Today and tomorrow are big days financially because, of course, we are watching the Fed. The Fed is looking at raising interest rates again. So just to kind of fill you in, the expectation is that it will be raised another 3/4 of a point. So we'll be talking a lot about, how that's going to affect your credit cards, your auto loan rates, your mortgage rates. All of that stuff is stuff that we're watching very closely. We know that it's starting to get more and more expensive out there for you. Just watch that carefully, and we'll be having more information on the show here. Coming up to kind of talk about, ways of managing that. And of course, I'm putting out some stories and things like that to tell you about ways to try and get down your credit card debt and things like that. I'm juggling right now because I saw our guest pop on the line for a second and then he popped off. So hopefully he's getting that worked out. Today, we're going to talk about something that's really, really critical, especially, we're watching the devastation right now in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Fiona. The flooding is just, incredible again. And, very, very serious. So today we're going to talk about something that's so important, and we're really at a crisis point because we are seeing, we've had 8 home property insurance companies fail recently. And so we have an expert who's joining us now to talk a little bit about those failures, why they're happening, what that means to you. And if you've been seeing these headlines, a lot of times the headlines are Louisiana, but we know perfectly well here in Houston that flooding and hurricanes are a big issue. And so we're going to be talking about that because, in fact, one of the failures does in fact concern people here in Houston. So please join me in welcoming Eris Papadopoulos to the show. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Heather, for having me on your show.
Yeah, we were so looking forward to talking to you because, as I was just telling our guests in the opening, we have now had 8 home property insurance companies fail recently. We're still in hurricane season. That's kind of creating a crisis for a number of people, and certainly creating a lot of worry for people about their homeowners insurance and property insurance. So first, just to fill in our viewers a little bit about your background, I've invited Eris here, by the way, folks, because he is an expert in making your home more resilient and also an expert in insurance. So he's really the go-to guy for us to kind of get some information on how we can be better prepared for all of this. So Eris, thanks again for being with us. And just tell us a little bit about your background.
I'm a construction industry veteran and a World Trade Center 9/11 survivor. And upon retiring, I authored the book, Resilience, the Ultimate Sustainability. It became the inspiration for a documentary called Built to Last with a question mark, which I welcome viewers to see. And I'm also the distinguished expert resilience at Florida International University's Extreme Events Institute. And I'm also helping organizations worldwide to build better.
I love that. Well, thanks so much for being with us. And it couldn't have come at a better time because, we're watching the devastation right now from Fiona. And of course, we're still dealing with hurricane season. And of course, here in Houston, we deal with it all the time. So definitely some critical issues. Let's dive into the latest number that we're seeing is 8 home property insurance companies that are basically, insolvent, going under, and that's leaving a lot of people stranded. So can you talk a little bit about the ones that have failed and why this is happening?
Yeah, it's an incredible year. And, this is happening while we haven't had any direct hurricane hits, so to speak of. So, what's happening really is a combination of several factors that's undermining financially a number of these smaller companies. And the first and one of the most important is the reinsurance market. And when we say reinsurance, these are the people who insure the insurance companies. And without these reinsurance companies supporting them, these insurance companies cannot stand on their own feet. So what's happened over the last several years is that these reinsurance companies, which have full freedom to price as they see, they're not regulated. So it's a market that's free to price, wherever they see the risk going, have essentially, according to some sources, doubled the cost of reinsurance. And that's a heavy cost on these insurance companies. So that's really shook a number of them. Some of them can't even get reinsurance. So they're on very shaky ground. Another thing that's happened, and we're all witnesses to that, is the high rate of inflation that's driving up costs of everything, including the cost of these insurance companies. And we've seen in the construction sector that construction costs have gone up almost 30% in the last couple of years. And really, after the disaster, you have to multiply that times another factor, which is kind of that demand surge, which we see in many post-disaster areas. So, we're looking at much higher costs, both to run the insurance companies and what they're insuring. On top of that, a lot of them are claiming there's too much litigation, especially in Florida. The cost of litigation has increased annually. There's been efforts in the state legislature to try to contain that. Unfortunately, they've fallen short. And on top of that, there's claims that there's increasing fraud in insurance, particularly when it comes to roofing contracts and products and so forth. So all this combination has created the perfect storm, which really has knocked the feet under a lot of these smaller insurance companies. And we're seeing the epicenter, Florida, but it's impacting the other states, Texas, Louisiana, et cetera.
Yeah. So, and for our Houston viewers, I know that in particular, Weston, which was recently became insolvent, that affects, I think, about 30,000 people here in just the Houston area. Can you talk about some of the other ones that you're aware of that have basically gone under?
Yeah, basically, there's a handful in Florida. I'm not sure if many of these did have much business in Texas. Lighthouse Insurance, St. John's Insurance, Southern Fidelity Insurance, Avatar PNC Insurance. I mean, those all went insolvent. And then there's a number of them that essentially said, we're going to hold back on the business in Florida and maybe other states. We're going to withdraw once these policies expire. We're not going to renew them, and we're going to cut back. And there's a number of those, like United PNC, Property and Casualty. I think they're in Texas too. And in fact, the state of Florida had to step in because they represented quite a number of policyholders and become their reinsurer temporarily because they couldn't get reinsurance. The state essentially became their reinsurer through the Citizens State Insurance Program. So they're being kept afloat temporarily with the help of the state. FedNat is another insurance company that I've heard, said they're going to be withdrawing in Florida. I'm not sure if Texas yet. And also Bankers Insurance Group, which I know is active in Texas, have said they're going to be pulling out of Florida, at least initially. So you've got a number of companies kind of either saying we're out or we're pulling back.
Yeah. So what do you do? So you find out that your insurance company is become insolvent or going under. So what do you do? You mentioned that in some cases the state is stepping in. Is that typically what happens? What happens next after that?
Yeah, in fact, you're back in the market for insurance, and you're knocking on doors of the remaining companies, some of which are going to turn away your business because they're already at the limit they feel safe with. Others are going to quote you a much higher price, and that's what a lot of consumers are seeing. They're getting quotes that are maybe 30, 40, 50% higher than what they were paying before. And I think in both Texas, along the coast at least, and in Florida, you have the state coming in as a backstop and saying, if you can't get insurance from anyone else, we'll insure you. In Texas, I think it's called the Texas Wind Insurance Association, TWIA. That will insure properties in the coastal states. There are some provisos there. You have to kind of meet certain minimum standards etc. But they're an important backstop, and I think they've got several 100,000 policies under their belt right now. I think I saw a number like 60 billion. Florida, unfortunately, has had to double at the state level the number of policyholders. They were about at 500,000 2.5 years ago, and now they're over 1 million that the state has had to step in and backstop. So the situation in Florida is really bad, and we haven't even had a storm, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, so far, yeah. Well, is there any way of knowing, like, is there a way that consumers can at least be a little less surprised, when they find out this? Is there a way of knowing that your insurance company is having trouble?
Well, there are rating agencies that rate these insurance companies. The most well-known, has been around for a century, is AM Best, but it's hard to get information from them. The other one that came up after Hurricane Andrew, and it is basically the agency for these smaller companies, called Demotech, Demotech, and it's much easier to go on their website and look for what they call the financial stability rating and check for your state what your insurance is rated at. And they have different levels. They have the A++, which is a double kind of quote, an A+, an A, and then below that is lower ratings like an S and an M. Well, basically, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac won't accept anything lower than an A. So if your insurer is at the A++, they're kind of several levels above that minimum floor. If they're at the A and they're a small insurer and they're heavily exposed in Florida, I'd be a little bit concerned, what may happen to them. So you can check. I mean, this company, Demotech, in July issued kind of an announcement that they were thinking of downgrading 17 companies. They didn't disclose the name of the companies. They basically say until we finalize it, it's confidential. But that alerted a lot of people, and Weston was on one of those companies, as we found out later. So they can either degrade an insurance company or not even certified, like pull the rating away, which is equivalent to not being rated and therefore not being qualified under Fannie and Freddie Mac. So at least I ask people check where the company you have is rated now, and if they're close to the boundary and they're heavily exposed in Florida. To me, that's an early warning sign. But it's difficult to tell, these companies, how they're handling these issues of reinsurance, how they're handling inflation and the costs they're bearing with litigation and so forth. Those are very difficult to get on the inside, before the problem. I mean, the rating agency is the first to know, unfortunately, and then the public comes later.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you now are, needing to shop around, wanting to shop around. Are there some things that you can do to try and lower the cost, since we are seeing people basically looking at higher premiums these days? Do you have any tips for trying to save money without, obviously I'm thinking some of these, smaller companies, they probably lower cost, but, they might have a bigger risk. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Unfortunately, unless you do something to your home, you're trading off cost for risk. Yes, you can increase your deductible. You can change your cap. You can, do things like, some of these programs don't have replacement costs. They have actual depreciated market value, which is less than the replacement cost. But essentially, you're taking more risk. You're not really, saving money. I like to say that the best insurance a homeowner can create is to improve their house, to make their home more resilient, because that in the end is what's going to protect us. The insurance is there, to save us on that, because we have weaknesses in our homes. But improving our homes should be our number one priority, especially when we're looking at home improvements. And a lot of us have been improving our homes the last couple of years because we're spending more time at home. But also when we're looking to move and relocate, yes, the appearances and the cosmetics and those things, appeal to us, but substances is the most important factor. How that home will withstand wind, how that home will stand flooding if it's in a flood zone, or even fire. So, I like to waken up consumers to resilience, because that's the ultimate protection, and that's the ultimate, money saver.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that. Are there some typical things that people can do? Obviously, it's probably a house by house situation, but what kinds of things can people look at doing that would make their homes more resilient?
Yeah, basically, you got to break it down into the different hazard categories. I'll start with wind, and it's not just for the coastal, counties and towns, but further inland we have tornadoes. So, wind is a common, threat to us, whether we're on the hurricane coast or we're further inland. And I start with the roof. The roof is the most vulnerable part of the house. Unfortunately, our codes are not strong enough to protect us from, these hazards. Codes are typically life safety measures, so they're aiming to, give us time to escape, to get out, to save our lives, but not necessarily to save our home, to save our eggness, to save our possessions. You've got to do more than the code to achieve that. So if you're renovating your roof, if your roof is at least 15 or more years old, you should be thinking of upgrading to an above code roof. And I typically say that on the coast, the minimum I would, go for wind rating on a roof is 165 miles an hour, nothing below that. And if you're further inland, further north away from the coast, the minimum should be 135. So, I mean, typically these are above what the code requires, and, it's the best investment you can make, And there are standards like the fortified standard that the insurance industry has developed that can guide you and gives the contractor kind of a very specific target to go to. And you can go to fortified.org and get more information there. So that's with the roof, the most vulnerable part. Then look at your windows and doors. Again, those should be rated at the same levels I mentioned before, 165 for the coast and 135 minimum inland. And the garage door particularly is one of the most important doors if you have a garage door, because if that garage door opens up, then that pressure will lift up the roof and the walls, and the whole house is starting to fall apart. So that should also be upgraded to those same levels. And these are improvements that have been done repeatedly in southern Florida. Where I live, I mean, it's a standard. Fortunately, in South Florida, the code has reached that level, so it's protecting everybody. So you don't have to, voluntarily do it. But in other parts of Florida, along the Gulf Coast, we still need that individual, decision to say, I'm going to go above the code. I'm going to go above the standard and protect my family. And it's a small incremental investment that really will pay the biggest dividend you can imagine, both in terms of insurance rates, but in terms of your safety, because it's not just insurance, it's your deductible, it's things you can't replace, it's all the other costs that come after a home is lost, displacement, temporary housing, loss of income, health effects, all these things that impact families.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got your website, by the way. It's buildingresilient.com. So you can, I was looking at it earlier today. You got a lot of great information. So everybody, please check that out. You'll find a lot of great information about making your home more resilient for a storm or a disaster. We now know that there are private insurance companies that can sell flood insurance. It used to just be the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sort of creates the marketplace. If we buy our flood insurance through a private, do we run the risk of, again, the possibility of an insurance company failure? Or again, I guess I'm just wondering, is it safer to just go ahead and buy it from the government? Or, what are your thoughts about, looking at some of the other options?
Yeah, you might get a better price from some of these private companies, especially if you're not in a very high flood prone location, but again, the government is not going to go insolvent as quickly as, a private company will. So there is that, incremental, let's say, security of getting the NFIP insurance. The government may be slow, but they're going to come through in the end, So, unless you're getting a big discount on flood insurance, from a private source, I would stay with NFIP.
Okay. And then let's talk about the flood maps. I know they've been making some improvements to flood maps to make them more accurate, more thorough. How are we doing on the flood maps? I've seen different articles talking about improvements, but also some areas for growth. So what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
the flood maps and how they're working to protect us?
Yeah, the flood maps are the basis for the rates and the requirement for NFIP insurance. So they're very political too. You know, when a neighborhood or a community gets included in the flood map, there's a number of people who resist it and want to fight back, and in my view that's defeating the purpose. So unfortunately the maps are still lagging. The government maps are still lagging in their place. In the last couple of years, we've seen some private nonprofit organizations like First Street Foundation come up with, I believe, very reliable flood risk mapping. It's called Flood Factor. You can go to floodfactor.com, and it has almost every property in the U.S. There's a rating from 1 to 10. There's also suggestions on what you can do. So I personally use that as my kind of guidebook. I look at the government maps from time to time, but I prefer to and they've flood factors calculate probably the number of flood prone properties is twice what the government is assuming. And in fact, even the government admits that 30% of the flood losses are for properties that are not in their maps. They're outside their maps. So they know that their maps should be covering more terrain, and they're not. So floodfactor.com is my personal source for flood information. And, if you're looking to buy a house or to move into a house, I would use that, as one of the criteria. In fact, realtor.com and I think Reddit, another real estate online service, incorporate that information in their listings now.
Okay. Well, to wrap up, if someone wants to get some more information about making their homes more resilient, or checking out their insurance carrier to make sure that they're still covered and in good standing, what would be some of your last minute tips and ways maybe people can get more information from you and your organization?
Well, on my website, you'll find the Buyer's Guide to Resilient Homes, which also includes ideas on retrofitting. And my nonprofit, the Resilience Action Fund, developed that jointly with another nonprofit, the Federal Alliance for Safe Home, about a year ago. And I'd say that's a must-have for any homeowner. It's like having me or another experienced friend kind of advising them. So take advantage of that resource. There's a lot of help sites and so forth. Unfortunately, the effort is to try to make these and put these in a language which the consumer can easily use, because a lot of it is a little bit too technical, and I'm trying to do that increasingly through my own nonprofit.
Okay. Eris Papadopoulos, thanks so much for being with us. It was a pleasure having you, and you really shed a lot of light on a lot of things that are really complicated, and but it's so important, so critical. So many people worried about making sure their homes are protected as we're seeing this crisis happen with some of our insurance carriers. So thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.
And thank you for being with us as well. Hope we gave you some good information. Take a look at your homeowner's insurance. You can take a look at some of those resources that he mentioned to check out your policy, make sure that your insurer is still in good shape. And if not, then, this is perhaps a good time for you to kind of look around and look at some of your options. It's always a good idea. But anyway, we will continue to keep you posted on this situation, and we will see you back here next time with more ways to save. Thanks for being with us.